My name is Deborah Miller Harris. The neighborhood I lived in was a very nice neighborhood. So we were considered poor, but I didn't know that because we lived a decent life. I grew up in the Titusville community. Very proud of that. There was a mixture of people. We had professional people, we had lay people. We lived on different sides. We lived the South Titusville, we had the North Titusville, and there were some economical differences, of course, but basically we all lived the same. Our school teachers, most of our teachers lived in the Titusville area. They came from Titusville, and you could have a teacher that was married to a Pullman porter, and no one thought anything about it. I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandmother was a homemaker, and we lived a very nice life. My father was an insurance salesman. My mother, my birth mother, was a nurse. But my mother and father were divorced, but we were adopted by our grandparents. So that's who I was raised with in their home in Titusville. My grandfather worked for U.S. Steel. He was called the water boy. So he would bring water to the miners. That's how he got started, as being the water boy. And then they started off working in the mines slowly. But that's how he got started. But he never talked about any indifferences or conditions and things like that. Mostly during that time, kids were not allowed. You were to be seen and not heard. That's what kids were raised during that time. So we were not privy to any conversations that they had about their work life or home life or things like that. We had no idea of anything that was going on because they protected and shielded us so well that we had no idea of anything that was going on outside of our area. We really didn't know. My grandmother, we lived in Titusville off 6th Avenue South, which is not far from the Birmingham City Jail. And my grandmother was called the $2 lady. When guys would get out of the city jail, they would come to our house, and she would, it didn't matter if you were black or white, she would prepare you a sandwich, give you a cup of coffee, and give you a dish of ice cream, and she would give you $2. So she became known for her kindness, and they would be mostly hobos and things like that. They would jump the trains, and we lived at the railroad tracks, and they would get on the train, and they would always knew about this lady, call her the $2 lady. At that time, I didn't realize there was a difference because that's what she did. And across the street from me was another family, Mrs. Vaughn's family, and there were whites in her family. So I didn't know at that time the big difference until I got older. When I saw that, they said, well, this colored lady gives off $2, and things like that. And I'm like, no big deal to me. I attended a wonderful elementary school, Center Street Elementary School, and it sat in the hub of the community. And the teachers there, I felt, were superb. We never ran. We had what we call supplies during that time. You paid your $2 fees, and if kids didn't have books, paper and pens and things like that, or pencils, the school was very helpful in getting that for you. If you came to school and you didn't have lunch money or you didn't have anything, people took you in and you were able to get everything that you needed. So we never had a problem with saying we didn't have books. We had books. Some of the books might have been written in and marked up and stuff like that, but we didn't know the difference because we had nothing to compare with. I was taught art, I was taught music, I was taught literature, I went to the children's theater. We had a wonderful teacher. Mrs. Harriet Cantelo was vitally important to us. I mean, she taught us the symphony, she taught us Brahms, she taught us Mozart. We learned all those things in school. So we had no difference. And my art teacher was wonderful. You know, my English teachers and all my teachers were great. They actually took us and made us learn. It was a learning experience. I mean, I enjoyed it. I really did. Um, I thought the teachers were superb. They were a little hard, but they were great. You know, they made us learn and they prepared us for the world. I didn't learn anything in high school. I want you to know that. Everything I learned was in elementary school because they prepared me so well. I learned some things, of course I did, but basically all my knowledge came from that school. That was a wonderful school. And this is the same school that Denise McNair attended that school as well. Her mother was one of my teachers, and I have very fond memories of her as well. They taught us so much, you know, about abstract art, about geography, you know, about history, about science. You know, we were prepared. We were studying algebra and stuff like that when kids were not doing stuff like that. They were phenomenal. They were phenomenal. I can't express, you know, those of us who attended Center Street still talk about Center Street. Most of us will always be lifelong friends. We have a Center Street School Facebook page. We even talked about a reunion, but now the school has been turned into, it's another school now. But we've talked about a plaque that we would like to have to present. And we were trying to get it before a lot of the teachers had passed away, but a lot of them have passed away. I mean, and they produced some very prominent citizens in this school, in this city. You know, a lot of our judges were attendees of Center Street School. Some of our doctors were attendees of Center Street School. Our council people were Titusville people, you know, from Center Street Schools. Look, Condoleezza Rice is from the same one. I mean, you know, she grew up in Titusville, you know, till her family moved away. Center Street was one of the schools. There was another school in the neighborhood. It was called Washington Elementary School. And they were very good as well. You know, I can't take away from them. The difference was 6th Avenue. Kids that lived on the other side attended that school. And kids who lived on my side attended that school. And kids who lived near Elmwood attended West Center Street until West Center Street closed, and then Center Street, then those kids on the south side, on South Titusville, attended Center Street, and those on the north side of Titusville attended Washington Elementary School. So that was the difference. There was never a competition saying you go to Washington, Center Street is better. We just knew they were different because of the location. In elementary school, like I said, Ms. Cantelo was our music teacher at the time. And we learned cantatas and things like that. And we had the choir. We used to do Christmas caroling. And that was so much fun to me. Our colors were red and white. Our school colors were red and white. And we had long red skirts and the white choir robes with the red turtlenecks. And we had little candle lights. And I remember the song, "It is better to light just one little candle than to stumble in the dark." I think that was taken from somewhere with Shirley Jones and Picnic or something like that, you know, but that was, Gordon McRae sang that song. I found out later. But that was one of the songs, and I'll never forget, that was a wonderful, beautiful time in the gym when we had just our little flashlights, candles, and that was a beautiful thing. Of course, we'd go downtown to see Santa Claus and sit on his lap and all that sort of stuff. You know, and the Christmas mornings when everything was already ready and you went to bed and Santa ate his cookies. We'd break cookies for Santa and his milk and stuff like that. And, you know, of course, we found out later what the real deal was. But we were so happy to wake up the next morning and you had all the stuff that you never asked for anything. We were, back during that time, most kids didn't ask for things. You were just given. That was Santa Claus came to the house and you were happy with whatever you got. You know, I remember getting the the kitchen set with the sink, you know, all that sort of stuff, and the dolls, and cowboy. My brother wore the cowboy outfit, and I had the cowgirl outfit. We had our little pop guns with the little, all that sort of stuff. We'd go outside, take pictures and stuff. Uh, Going through the neighborhood, we would go sing. We would do Christmas carols in the neighborhood, but the decorations, that's what we loved. Everybody had their own little thing. We would be out there raking the leaves, and that was fun to me because all the neighbors came out during that time. And we all raked our leaves. We could burn trash in the city then. We burn our leaves in the city. You burn our leaves, and then everybody got everything up, and then they would start to wash the windows and stuff, and all the ladies would be out there, doing their little thing with their Christmas wreaths and stuff like that, and you put your trees and things up, and that was fun to me. And our thing was going from neighborhood to neighborhood and looking at the decorations, or driving downtown and looking at the decorations, or going to Bizets or Loveman's in Parisian where they had the actual windows. That was fun to me. We would go downtown. That was magical to watch those windows, and we would see the animation and stuff like that. Oh, that was so much fun to me. And we'd go into Sears and Roebuck, and they had this big carousel with peanuts and stuff like that. You could get the hot peanuts and stuff. We'd go in there and we'd get that kind of stuff. I'll go to J.J. Newberry's and get some popcorn and stuff. That was fun. Those were the memories that I remember. Then going to church that Christmas and having to see the nativity scenes. They were live. It was live stuff then. You had the plays at the school when you did the Christmas. We did Scrooge one year, and like I said, Mrs. Cantlow was far beyond her time. She was ahead of her time. We would set the room up, she had the Scrooge and had the different scenes, and we already knew about all that kind of stuff growing up in elementary school. The things that most kids learned in high school. We were learning that in elementary school because they were those teachers were so advanced. That community was such a vital community in our growing up. I have great pride when I say I'm from Titusville. I have Titusville pride about that. So it was a wonderful experience. And if I could go back now, I would do it. But there's just not enough property over there to be able to find something. My husband and I both are from Titusville. And I have great pride when they say, we have a term that's called straight out of Titusville, or straight out of wherever you're from, straight out of Compton. We have straight out of Titusville, and I have great pride when I say Titusville because it was not a hood, it was a neighborhood. Things have changed a lot, of course. The world has changed, but it was a sense of great pride. People took great pride in their property. They took great pride in their what they did. I didn't hear of a lot of squabbles and things like that. We fought, of course, we had fights, and we were kids, but we had great pride in our neighborhoods, and people took great pride in their homes, and women were little socialites, so I put it like that, and the men worked. And women had nice homes, we had nice yards. We took pride in our neighborhood and our yards and our lawns, and Christmas time and things like that. We all decorated together, we got out there and burned leaves together, and we would decorate. And Halloween, the kids would all dress up. You go to each other's homes and trick or treat. There were things that we were normal. We lived what we considered a normal life, no different from anyone else's. And we weren't told that there was a difference until I would ride with my next door neighbor, and her grandmother worked for some people over the mountain. And we would go over the mountain, and of course the houses were bigger and stuff like that, but we thought it was much better. But when we found out later in life that everybody was doing the same thing, but you weren't told that, but you just kind of assumed that, because everybody lived in different neighborhoods and things like that things were different. But they really weren't. They really weren't. I do have great pride. I have great pride about Titusville. I do. I really do. A lot of good people, a lot of great things. We have a lot of artists, a lot of authors, a lot of educators. I just do. I just have great pride when it comes to Titusville and the things that we've done and the accomplishments. Even Carol Smitherman, coming from, and her daughter, and Roger Smithman. I don't know if Roger's not from Titusville, but I know Carol was from Titusville. The Sterlings, I mean, they run Davenport and Harris. His mother was a teacher at Center Street School, and Paul Gardner, his family, A.D. Gaston's family, they run Smith and Gaston. The Bush Lines, the girl that runs that is Valencia Kane. She's one of the inheritors of that. These people are great. The Arrington's daughter-in-law lived in the back of me, and so she married into the family. But these are people that are doing great things, great ministers and songstresses and things like that, and actors and actresses, that came out of that era. So I have great pride when I say Titusville. It just kind of that being that comes over me when it comes to talking about Titusville. The only difference you could really say was that you were isolated in your neighborhoods. You saw people that looked like yourself. We had a rainbow of colors. So you could see people who were blue-black and were as pale as you. So we never really saw race that way. At least I didn't. My family didn't. We didn't see that. But you could tell that we had our own community stores. We had our own dry cleaners. We had our own pharmacy. We had our own bowling alley. So we lived in that area that we didn't know that there was a difference until we were able to go downtown, and that's when there was a difference. I knew there was a difference in when we had to go out of town or go downtown. The difference I saw, because we rode the bus, my family didn't own a car at the time, so we had to sit in the back of the bus. And I never understood that, because as a child, you just ride the bus and you get on the bus, you pay your money, then we had to get back off the bus and then re-enter the bus from the rear. But I'm just a kid, so I didn't know that there was a difference until I got older and realized there was a difference. My grandmother was a very prim and proper lady. So we wore the dress, we would dress up for downtown, wore the gloves. I was one of the little frilly little girls that had the little pigtails and had to wear all the nice stuff. And we were on the elevator in Bazit's. I'll never forget it. And we got to the mezzanine. So we had been in downtown pretty little while downtown. So I was getting hungry. And we stopped on the mezzanine, and people were getting off, and I was smelling the food. And we called her Big Mama. I said, Big Mama, I'm so hungry. I said, well, can't we go get some food, while we're here? And the elevator attendant and my grandmother both looked at me and said, shh, don't say that. And I said, well, why? I said, I'm hungry. The little girl just got up. She's going with her mom to get something to eat, and I want something too. And she said, no, you can't. I said, well, I want some water. And so they led me off to get some water, and there was a very pretty water fountain, really white and clean, and there was another water fountain that was dirty, and I noticed the word white and colored, and that's when I realized that there was a difference. I had to drink out of the dirty water fountain instead of the clean water fountain, and I couldn't go sit down and eat because I felt like we were dressed as nice as everyone else. We couldn't go because my grandmother explained to me later that we couldn't because we weren't allowed to. And that hurt my feelings. And I said, why? She said, because we're Negroes, and Negroes aren't allowed to go into white establishments. And I said, but we're shopping and we're buying stuff. I could understand that because we were buying clothes, we were spending money, but why couldn't I eat in there? I didn't understand that, but she said, that's just the way it is, and just don't ask me any more questions. And that was the end of it. I was hurt and hungry, but it didn't hit me at that time how significant that conversation was. I didn't understand it. I just knew that there was a difference, and she explained it the best she could, but I didn't realize until I got older what that really meant. My father's neighborhood in Woodlawn, we had little white kids that lived next door to my grandparents. And I thought it was normal to play with the kids, until I guess around 1960, a little after, before 1962, or a little after 1962, when my family was killed in a car accident. Those kids were not allowed to play with us anymore. That's when things were starting to get heated up in the city, But we didn't have any idea. We just know that they moved away, and they were right before they left. They were told not to play with us anymore. So we didn't understand that. Bull Connor was the police commissioner at that time, and he rode in a white tank. He rode through our neighborhoods in this white tank. And we were told that when we saw the tank, that we were to hide. We had to come in the house. Everybody scattered and came in the house. And I couldn't understand, what do you mean a white tank? I didn't understand that. But we were told, don't, if you see that tank, and they knew, word passed along from neighborhood to neighborhood, Bull Connor, and he was on his bullhorn, saying things. I didn't understand what he was saying, but I just knew there was a difference. When they heard the name Bull Connor, people were frightened. We were told to go in the house. It was just a regular tank, but he rode through it, and I just, it was funny to me, because I'm thinking it's like a man on the Sherman horse, a big deal, so. But we were told to not say anything and not to go outside during that time. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand who Bill Bull Connor was until I got a little older. Then I understood that he was a bad man. My aunt lived in Gadsden, and where she lived, there was a commissary that we would go to. Kids, we would walk to the store. And the Klan marched every Thursday. So we had to be careful to not go to that store during that time, because they would walk down the street with their hoods and everything on, and say those ugly words. And we had to be careful not to be seen by them, or something would happen to us. But I do remember that, and my aunt making us know that on Thursdays we couldn't go to the store on that day. We had to stay at home, because they marched through it right near her home. She lived in an integrated neighborhood. One section where she lived was black, then up the street it was integrated, then this way it was white. So they were in the melting pot of everything, but we were told on Thursdays we couldn't go. And I did see them, and I was scared, because I saw these men on horses, and they were walking down the street with these hoods on, and saying these N words, on a bullhorn, and I didn't know what else to do but be scared. I went back to our house. We saw them one time. That's when we went on a Thursday. We didn't know. Then we were told after that we couldn't go after that on Thursdays. I heard of someone that they knew, the family. It was kind of hush hush, but someone that had been killed by the Klan, had been hung by the Klan. I never knew the person's name. I just know they would talk about the incident, that we found such and such a person, and he was hung. It was a man, and they found him hung, downtown on a building. At a building downtown, they would hang people on 4th Avenue. They sure did. Red skies all day long. That's all I remember. Um, Off 6th Avenue is a place called the Cotton Gin, near the Birmingham jail, which right up under the viaduct. And that's the only thing I knew of. I knew of no other contaminated places or industries there. I mean, people had problems from smoking and things like that. My mother and one of my neighbors, my next door neighbor, they both went to, they called TB camps, because they had tuberculosis. But I don't know if that was caused by anything, or if there was a tuberculosis outbreak during that time, but I do remember both of them going to what they call the fresh air camps. There was a actual family doctor that lived in the neighborhood, off 6th Avenue. He was kind of like the physician for everybody that over there. But we all went to the clinics. We went to the Central Health Clinic, which was right there on 6th Avenue South, and had all our immunizations and everything. The only encounter I had was as a teenager that I first remember. I had a toothache, a horrific toothache. And my grandfather took me to this particular dentist on the south side. And he had a door for colored and for white. And that really ticked me off because I was a young teen at that time. And I couldn't understand that because I had just started high school. And I was attending Phillips High School. And I didn't understand why this stuff was still going on, colored and then white. And we're in the same building, but the doors, we had to walk into two different doors. I didn't understand that. They were kind of separated like through a partition, but not really. Kind of, but not. That didn't make sense to me, He did the same thing, he extracted the tooth and that was it. But I thought that, and that practice went on for years, even afterwards. In my early teens, he did that for years until he was made to stop. Or either he retired, I don't remember which one, but I do know he did that for years. There was Ullman High School. Ullman High School was the very popular African American high school that most kids went to. But when I was being prepared for integration during that time, our teachers prepared us and told us and worked us very hard and said, this is what's coming up. And these are the schools you're going to be going to. And we want you to be mentally and academically prepared to go to these schools. My cousin and I chose Phillips because everybody else was going to Ullman or they were going to Ramsey. And we didn't want to go to either one. So we chose Phillips because it was different. Little did we know the history behind Phillips. We really didn't know the history about Shuttlesworth going there prior to and being beaten because he tried to take some students there. I didn't really learn this until I was older. How significant that was, the change, that we made that bold change during that time. And it was different. I met a lot of good people there. There was some racial tension, but not as much as you would think. We had a couple of incidents where a friend of mine was called a name and she almost got into a fist fight. And I had to intervene for that, in our session room. But most of the time, I think we were all discovering each other, A lot of white girls dated black guys, especially the jocks, and a lot of white guys, because I even dated a couple of white guys, in school. It was no big deal. It was just fun. It was that love thing, that groovy thing we were doing back during that time. But you had some instances where you had some people that said some things, but not as bad as it was for others. It was harder for boys than it was for girls, because boys were more adventurous and they liked to go out and do things. And I remember a story that my brother that's next to myself told me about. He and some more boys that took a car and went to Homewood. And this was in the 60s. And how an officer took a shotgun to one of the boys' heads. And they were scared to death that they were going to die because they got called all kind of names. And my mother had to go get them. I didn't know this until, I guess, maybe about 20 years ago. He told me this, about this incident in Homewood. Pulled them over for no reason because they were in Homewood. That was like riding to Mountain Brook. Why are you in Mountain Brook? You don't live over here. And I remember these things myself. riding to different areas, the police would follow you because like, you don't live over here, so why are you over here? So you knew not to go to certain areas. And that's just the truth. That's just the gospel truth. We knew not to go to Mountain Brook. We knew no Vestavias, nothing like that, over the mountain. Oh, no. If you didn't live over there, you didn't work over there. If you worked over, that's different. But you didn't live, you had no reason to come there or drive through there for no reason, period. That's it. They pulled the shotgun on one of his friends. Then my brother was the youngest of the group, of that little group. And they were just some of the teenage boys, and one of the boys had a car. And they drove through Homewood. Can't tell you where they were in Homewood, but I just know they said Homewood. And the police stopped them. And he said they were so scared because he pulled a shotgun to the driver's head and scared them so badly that my mother was more of a militant type of person. She was born in a different era. And they called my mother and she came to get them. And I didn't know that. I had no idea that it even happened. The things the boys could tell you about things that they encountered were more so horrific than the girls, because we didn't venture out of the neighborhood that much, except when we got to high school and we went through integration. But the majority of the time, the boys were the ones that went out and did everything, and they knew not to go to certain areas. But that particular day, they were just riding and just being kids and could have been killed. And I think that, and that's even today, going to different stores. When I come out of a grocery store and myself and someone else who's white may come out at the same time, if there's a group of black guys coming, she grabs her purse and pulls so tightly, like she's pulling, the knuckles are turned red because she's so scared. And these guys are just walking, paying no attention. And I'm going, hi, how you doing, And she's scared to death that she's going to get robbed. This happened. And it really pissed me off that she did it, because I'm thinking, these kids are just coming to the store and she's acting like they're going to rob her. They were nowhere near her. But she was scared she was older, she was scared to death. As if she was going to, not from me walking out with her, but just to see the young boys walking by. And there were maybe 3 or 4 boys, walking, going to the store, laughing and talking. They weren't bothering anybody, but she was scared to death. And I just stood there and looked at her. I'm like, you idiot. These boys are not thinking about you. But they spoke. And I'm saying, hi, how you doing? Like being the mama in me all the time, Thank God they weren't sagging pants during that time, because I probably would have said something. I do that. I was never told or taught to hate anyone based on the color of skin or anything like that, I was never taught that. So I never had that growing up. I was never taught a prejudice because of that. I was never told that white people were better. I was never taught that I was inferior. I just felt inferior when I had to be in places where they made me feel inferior, but I wasn't taught to be inferior. But people made me feel inferior when I would go to different establishments and I was treated differently. That Sunday morning, we were preparing for church. And on Sundays, I usually read what they call the funny papers. So they were comics. We call them the funny papers then. And I was reading my regular comics. And there was a blast that shook the windows. But now, mind you, I live right off Green Springs near a railroad track. And the railroad track was across the street from me. So the shaking was different from the shaking that would come on with the railroads. It was a sonic boom that just kind of shook everything, and we just went on about our business. Then the phones started ringing, and everybody was like, 16th Street has been bombed, 16th Street Church has been bombed. and we didn't go to church that day because everybody was on the phones and talking, about 16th Street Church being bombed. Didn't know anything about Denise or anything like that till later on. Oh wow, when I think about that Friday I had just seen her, walking down the halls, and we smiled, and I call it the smile, we smiled at each other. And that was it. Miss McNair had been my third grade teacher, and I was going to the fourth grade at that time. So I was leaving Miss McNair's classroom from her being my teacher, but she was such an elegant and regal woman, that I thought fondly of her. But when I heard that Denise was killed, I just couldn't fathom someone bombing a church. And we were on our way to church, and I just couldn't think of who would be so mean and cruel to bomb the church. And I knew Denise, but I didn't know about the other little girls because I didn't know them. But it was just the saddest thing I ever heard in my life, and to see Miss McNair so broken. Oh, that was heartbreaking. That was heartbreaking. My next door neighbors and several of my neighbors were members of 6th Avenue Baptist Church. And that's where they held the funeral. And of course, I attended with my neighbors. We were little girls, we were 9 years old, 9 and 8, different ages. And we had to go up to the balcony because we weren't allowed to be down on the ground floor. The place was packed. Didn't realize the magnitude of that day with Martin Luther King and all the other civil rights movement members who were there, to see those 3 caskets, because one of the girls was not with that group. She was laid to rest somewhere else. But to see those 3 caskets lined up down front, and we're in the balcony, and we're watching this, and all these cameras and things like that, we had no idea of the magnitude that it made around the world. We just knew that it was somebody that we knew that had been killed. And the mother was a dear teacher to us that we loved. It was horrific. When I think about it now, and the magnitude and the hate behind it, it's horrific when you say, we're on our way to church to worship, and you're downstairs. And my pastor, who's a female, she and her husband and wife, she was a member of that church. And she was a friend to those girls. And that particular Sunday, she didn't go to church. She was late. She was dragging around, and she would have been right there because Addie was her best friend. So she would have been right there with them. Denise was very prissy. She was spoiled rotten. She was pretty. She was very pretty, very well dressed, very well groomed, because Miss McNair was that type of woman, and Denise would sometimes have to sit in the class. We had kids who were older who would hold the classrooms for the teachers while the teachers went do different things in the office and stuff like that. I remember Denise kept our class a couple of times, and she was like I said, she was very well dressed, so she was dressed really to the nines, what we call as kids, And that particular day, that last day, it was just to see her smile, If you did not know the people who were actually involved, a lot of people didn't know Sarah existed, because I heard that she had been traumatized for so long that she never talked about it. So we never knew about a 5th child that was there until years and years later, that we never knew that this was Addie's sister that was actually left blinded by that. We never knew about the 2 little boys who were killed that same day. I never heard anything about those boys until I was an adult. I never knew that they existed or were killed were riding bicycles. I never heard anything about it. The thing we heard about was the Emmett Till story, because that made national news. And of course, him being in the magazines that we all took at that time was the Ebony and Jet, and his picture being in that magazine and watching it, you just couldn't imagine a child. He didn't even look like a human being, so we can't imagine things. My mind just couldn't fathom it. So when I found out about the two little boys, I'm like, what two little boys? I don't know anything about two little boys. Realized that there were two little boys that were killed that same day. And those families of those children are probably never spoken to about these incidents. And it's most likely, and most probability, these families have moved away. The media didn't talk about stuff like that. Everything was so hush-hush, it was controlled by different entities. You just didn't talk about that kind of stuff. You just didn't, shake the apple cart, Civil rights was new, so people were afraid during that time, very afraid. So a lot of things were not ever discussed, because that was a bad day to go just look at the footage on television and to see that church and to see them bringing the bodies out, and not knowing how mangled the bodies were. Just the idea that you've got it down there in a church and you're killing for hate. Why? But why? Why? We didn't understand. Unless you were a part of that movement, you did not really realize the magnitude of what was going on. You just didn't know. You knew that something was going on, but you had no idea how deep it was if you weren't a part of it. So you would not know the hate behind the bombings and things like that. There were different bombings in the city. We heard about them. Dynamite Hill, we heard about all of that, Arthur Shore's home being bombed and Shuttleworth's church being bombed and things like that. But you didn't talk about it because people were afraid, very afraid. If you weren't a part of that, you just didn't know enough. And there were families that just lived their lives and never talked about it. And there were families that were actually participants. I dated a young man in high school whose mother was a very strong participant in the civil rights movement. I didn't realize how deeply she was involved. I was chosen to model for her and do some projects and things, some African dancing and even do some things with them. But I had no idea, because I had been shielded so much as a child, that I really didn't realize a lot of stuff until I got older. And had I known, being the person that I am, I would have been involved in a lot of things, I'm sure. I would have gone to the march. I definitely would have. But because I was shielded and my parents and my grandparents were not a part of that, they were much older. So they shielded us from a lot of things, We just didn't know. When I went to beauty school, I went to cosmetology school, and the school that I attended is no longer in existence now. But the instructor was an older white woman. It was her school, but she had certain clients who were her clients, and that's whom we had to. Our senior exams were based on them. I learned a European style called pivot point. And it was a certain European way of styling the hair and angling the hair on certain angles and things like that. And this particular lady, she was our test. And she had this beautiful white hair, beautiful. She wore the spinster shoes. She was like an old school mom. She was not married. She was a spinster. And, but she was nice. And we could only do her hair. And that's how we were graded. But there came a time when we had to do, we had what we call our state competitions. And the hairstyle that year was called the scoop. My instructor did not want any of the black girls to participate. She had her mind set on a particular white girl, a guy, to do it. But he didn't want to do it. I wanted to do it. And she didn't want me to do it at all. And she made it, and she did not help me at all. The students helped me. And she was my model was my best friend. She never had a perm in her hair. And we permed her hair, and lightly we cut her hair to the scoop. And it was the most awesome haircut. And this haircut was almost like the Dorothy Hamill haircut. So my girlfriend had hair long like yours, but we had to cut this short haircut. But I'm telling you, the haircut was beautiful. And she would shake her head and every hair fell in place. And she couldn't believe that I had done it, because she figured I couldn't do it, but I did it. It was beautifully done, and we won a prize for that. It wasn't the first prize, but we won a prize, and we were in the paper. Of course, she was very proud to stand there with us then. I bought my model's dress, shoes, I did her makeup and everything. She had never done any of this stuff, and she did not help me at all. And that was my way of knowing. I'm like, wow, I can't believe she did that. She would not even help me. But the other kids, the other adults who were there, both black and white, helped me to do that haircut and to get that. And my model was gorgeous, but she would not help me. I didn't think anything of it after it was done. I still graduated and everything, but she didn't help. And that was that hurt me really badly, because I'm thinking, we're at the school together, we're here laughing and talking, we're doing things together and stuff like that. But she did not. This was 1977. She did not want me to participate. And then later on, as I changed professions, I was at Brookwood Hospital then as a secretary, and she was a patient and coming down the hall, and she saw me, and I saw her. We saw each other, and I called her name, and she said, "Debbie, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I work here." And she said, "Oh," she said, I said, "What about the school? You still doing the school?" She said, "No." She said, "I shut the school down." She said, "I'm dying of melanoma, cancer. I'm having cancer." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And she said, "Would you pray for me?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I will. I'll pray for you." She said, "I just want you to know I'm so sorry for the way I treated you with that competition." She said, "I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me?" I said, "Yes, I forgive you. And I will be praying for you." And I hugged her. And she died maybe a year later. I never held any grudges. As a young person, I dined there. I went to the supper club, A.J. Gaston Supper Club. So it was very posh during that time. I remember seeing Nancy Wilson there, doing a concert there. So it was considered one of the upper crust places to go. Fourth Avenue during that time was a thriving area for blacks. You had your different hotels and your different lounges and things like that. That was where people gathered when they wanted to go places. You had the Aqua Lounge, which was La Bristow's, and then you had the La Rosa Hotel, and you had the Peppermint Lounge, and you had A.G. Gaston's, which was a supper club, and it was very nice. I never went to the motel part, but the supper club, it was really nice, very nice. It was very posh, and you had your napkins, your corslet linens, and things like that during that time. So things that I observed when I was in Chicago, that type of living, I observed in Chicago. I had never seen that, because we were just plain people that lived decent lives. We had tablecloths and napkins and things like that. I never went to a restaurant like that until I went to Chicago. So to come back to Birmingham as an adult, young adult, and see that was phenomenal to me. That was very nice. It was very nice. Even though we have differences with our skin color, we're still the same on the inside. If you cut me, I'm going to bleed red blood. If I cut you, you're going to have red blood. Nothing makes us different except the things that we're taught. We're taught to hate. If you put two little kids in a room at the age of 1 year old and they're toddlers, they're going to gravitate to one another. They're not going to look at the difference in their hair. They might grab each other's hair because they know they're different, but they're not going to dislike each other. They're taught. Hatred is taught, and we need to stop that. You get back what you give. If you give hate, you're going to get hate. It may not be you, but it could be one of your grandchildren. They could be killed by someone. It doesn't necessarily have to happen to you. It could happen to someone in your family. You know, yeah, bad things happen. Yes, kids get molested, women are raped, things happen, vicious things happen in this world. But there are a lot of good things that happen too. We need to stop being so hateful to one another. People just don't realize how much we got to think about what we're doing nowadays, And a lot of people don't believe in God. I understand that to a degree. If God said he made man in his image, God was not an ape. I didn't walk on all fours, But that day is going to come, and even every vocation I've done, working with the juvenile court system and all the different things, when people get in trouble, the first person they call on is God. It's the first person. But then you say you don't believe in him. But you say, oh God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Stop pretending, because when you close your eyes, you got to go somewhere. I mean, that book was not written just for entertainment. A lot of our children need to know what happened and the people that struggle for them. That's the thing I'm about right now. People need to know the struggles that were made for them and not take it for granted, the things that they enjoy today. Because someone had to die for you to enjoy that. Someone made a sacrifice for you to be able to go to college, for you to go and sit at Harvard, or you to go to Yale, or, things like this. Somebody's blood, sweat, and tears went through that for you. So don't take it for granted when you can drive a fancy car. Get out and work. Stop asking the government or some people to take care of you. Do for yourself. People took pride in working, and the fact that no matter what they did, they were good at what they did. They held these jobs for years. They didn't change jobs every 3 months, every 6 months. If they made X amount of money, they lived off X amount of money. And these people raised their children in the worst of times to be educated people later on in life, who are now the backbone of this country. We need to know this as a people, as a race of people, that we're all the same, and stop this hate, because it's just not worth it in the end. It's just not.